Okay, I think we're ready. Welcome to the fifth of the CINE Talks called Future Digital Possibilities for Museums and Heritage. My name is Anna Vermeeren and I'm the project manager of CINE, a 3-year digital heritage project. I work for Museum Nord, that is located in northern Norway, and we operate 21 museums in the region of Nordland. Museum Nord is lead partner in the CINE project. Today, I will be your host and moderator, and I hope that you who are watching live on Facebook give us comments and questions in the chat box on the side. So feel free to put them in. We will bring these questions and comments into our panel discussion. Over the last 3 years, our partnership of 9 partners in Ireland, Iceland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Norway have been working on several different technologies in different case study sites. That is, for example, from creating virtual and augmented reality models that were tried and tested in different contexts. So, for example, in online exhibitions, but also outdoors, on site, and maybe used in online events, etc. We have used technology to map data, map heritage, and to layer information and to curate this content. And we've used this project also to train others, for example, in order to digitize objects or to use existing digital services in good ways, for example, in the museum context. I think the project has given us a lot of opportunities to experiment, and I would now like to ask our partners to reflect on their experiences in the project. Each of them has 3 minutes, and first I would like to ask Gunnar Liestøl from the University of Oslo to reflect on curating digital content. Gunnar, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, taking part in the CINE project has been a great experience. To some extent, the CINE project has been like many others, EU organized projects where you meet great people, learn a lot of new things, but at the end, you don't always get to work that much with the other partners from other countries. And there are so many, practical obstacles because of that. But I think the CINE project now is also very different from many other projects I worked in. And I think a lot of other projects have the same experience. And I'm thinking about the pandemic because it's created a very, very different and very unfamiliar experience for all of us. So I've learned that's the most dramatic learning I've had during the CINE project is that do not embark on a situated location-based AR project when if you're expecting a pandemic, because you can't travel, and it's almost impossible to do a location-based project which is away from where you live your life and where you work. And so this has put severe constraints on our work, particularly for the past year. But then again, when you meet big problems and you need to sit down and think about ways to solve them, we have one solution to the pandemic problem demonstrated now, because we're meeting in this way. We're not meeting physically in Lofoten. I wish we were, but we're not. But after all, this is a good secondary solution. But my experience has also been positive, because I've learned that the AR solution that we have been working on for the past 12 years actually has a larger potential than I initially was thinking. Because due to some technological constraints, we chose a full screen solution. But now it turns out, and I actually knew it because we were doing the same when we were testing, that it perfectly, our solution worked perfectly as a screen-based VR system. So that in our context, what we create for this indirect AR can also be used as a VR system. It can directly be ported to a VR system. Not a stereoscopic version. We need to find new interface conventions to make that applicable. But it's possible for people to access this site with this technology, just exporting the whole system to HTML or WebGL as we use. And this is the solution that we have used all the time for testing. So instead of having to fly to the location where you're testing the VR system, AR system, you can test it on test a lot of the functionality on the screen. And I think this experiencing this as a solution to the problem, you suddenly see how overdetermined the technology is. That the technology has a lot of unreleased potential. And when you come into a strange situation like the pandemic, suddenly all these other features are revealed. And I think that's been a great design experience.
Thank you, Gunnar. I'm going to stop you there. That's been very useful. You're talking about adaptability in such a time. Next, I would like to introduce Skuli Björn Gunnarsson from Gunnarsdóttir in East Iceland. Skuli, are you with us? I can see you here, yes. Skuli, can you hear us?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I know you've been on the road and just arrived in Reykjavik, so thank you for your for coming in.
Well, I was just arriving in Reykjavik, so I was just running in for the internet connection. Well, I was handed the topic serious gaming in heritage for this last talk here, and mainly because one of the things that we have explored in our CINE work package is gamification and how we can benefit from gamifying the cultural heritage. On our seminar and think tank in Reykjavik in 2018, we gathered people from different sectors and not least from game industry and the museum sector. And the topic was Let's Play Heritage. Important is to think out of the box and also get the sectorial boxes to communicate with each other. The conclusion of the think tank was that the game people and the museum people need to work much more together in collaborating and sharing ideas to learn to understand each other, and need to utilize the digital in a positive way for innovation in the field of cultural heritage. We live in a world where 40% of the mankind play games regularly. And the generations that grew up playing video games in the 70s and 80s are still playing now as a middle-aged people. And the young generations are playing games more than ever on their computers, Xboxes and smartphones. And new generations, they have new expectations for museums and heritage communication. And you can not use the same methods to drive their curiosity as their parents and grandparents. One way of meeting the new expectations is to use games and gamification in disseminating cultural heritage. And we can call it serious gaming because the main goal is to educate our visitors, but we always have to bear in mind that the part of the trick behind a successful game where the player really steps into the so-called magic circle is fun, and you don't reach your goals by making a dull game. And why shouldn't culture communication be entertaining? We have learned that storytelling is a fundamental thing in gamifying. A good game needs a good story to work, and the narrative can be made with pen and paper. But nowadays we have all kinds of high-tech gadgets to build the game and platforms to play on. In our work package, we built a mobile game from scratch, but we also experimented with using the CMS game platform of the project partner Locatify. And the technology is moving fast in this branch, and the smartphones in our hands are magnificent tools, precise geolocation cameras that can drive the illusion of the augmented reality and great audio. And our experience from the CINE project is that you don't need to hire a game designer or a programmer to build a successful game to disseminate your cultural heritage. You can create games from indoor, outdoor use on open platforms and bring new experience to your visitors. So seriously, we should do more of using power of games and gamification to bring new life to our museums and heritage sites, and utilize the endless digital possibilities in favor of our cultural heritage. And that was my side.
Wow, Skuli, exactly 3 minutes. That's very impressive. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on gamification and making heritage a bit more fun. Alan Miller is from St. Andrews University, and I would like Alan to reflect on managing data. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And managing data, it doesn't, managing in data perhaps aren't the most exciting words in and of themselves. But when you think about it, when you think about data can take lots of different shapes and lots of different forms. So it can be something that is kind of like descriptive, that involves statistics and understand.
Alan?
Sorry, yeah, that involves statistics and statistics and understanding. It can also mean video, 360s, 3D. So it can be really exciting. And I think that one of the things that is really come out over the project is the way in which things have changed over the years. That increasingly the power of computers and of graphics and graphics mean that we can means that we can do a whole bunch of new things and new exciting things. And I think that that's been coming through in the project. I mean, it's been fantastic, the digital reconstructions that have gone on across the project, whether it be Ireland, Iceland, Norway, or Scotland, bringing data to people in new and exciting ways. And I think one of the things that has really come to the fore, partly as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown, is the extent to which we can use these imaginative and new forms of data in live settings, in ways in which so people can both have a digital reconstruction and a 3D model and be engaged in live discussion and argument and learning about that. And I think that in a sense, one of the things that COVID has kind of forced us to do has been to communicate with each other through Zoom and through international things, and the way in which we're doing now. And in a sense, it's kind of shrunk the globe. And I think it's taught us that we can have international collaborations, which are a lot more fluid and a lot more productive than perhaps we imagined they were in the past. So I think that it's going to be really exciting the next 5 years. And I think kind of the challenge is for us to imagine what we want the post-COVID digital heritage world to look like. And I think we should try to be imaginative with respect to those.
I think that is a very nice way of putting it, and I hope that this session will give us a little bit more new ideas on how we can do that. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Over to Niall McShane from Ulster University. Niall, I would like to ask you to reflect on community co-production.
Hi, thanks, Anna. So, as Anna says, I'm from Ulster University, and I'll be talking about community co-production today. So a bit about my background as well. So I came to this project from a technology perspective. So I work in an innovation and technology center. My background was in 3D and game development. So I always think about co-production from that perspective, and I'll just reflect on what the experience I've had with it. So Judith is on the call here as well. She's with Donegal Museum. We've been partnered up for the last 3 years, working on the idea of co-production. So one of the opportunities of CINE was that you could pair a heritage partner with an innovation partner. And we've kind of figured it out along the way what and applied that work to at a community level. So I say I was new to the heritage sector. I came from an industry background, developing games and entertainment products, but I seen this as a chance to work in with data visualization at and heritage being a very interesting. I thought it was a very interesting concept, so I came to it with a blank slate. And the idea of co-production was part of our work package, and just to introduce that concept. So we were looking at the process in which we facilitate and empower the community individually and collectively. So making the community curators, makers, performers of their own stories. And the way that the CINE project has gone about that is by applying the technology and tools at the community level. So I'd made a lot of assumptions in that too, so some of the things that I've learned during the process is that the ideas you have, it's easy to project your ideas, and especially from a technology background, but it's more difficult to reflect others, especially the community's ideas. So as a technologist, you have to be very flexible and you have to learn to listen. And you can't really expect everybody in a community to become a technologist or to be that interested in the technology, but they will be interested in the outputs. And those outputs can have a lot of meaning to your community, and you can add, you can make people's attention valuable and kind of show the possibilities of the future. So that's what I've also seen as the most rewarding part of this project. So you don't often get to work that close with the community, and especially whenever you're working on a computer or technology background. So you get a lot of feedback, and you work very closely and become very involved with your audience. And I guess that's the thing that I've really enjoyed throughout the project. And in the future, I hope to see the tools being used more, and there's a lot of possibilities with what we can do with this work.
Thank you very much, Niall. That was great to hear. Thank you to all of you. As I said, we welcome questions from our Facebook audience. Please just post them and we will take them up in the discussion later. Today's event is about the future. I think you've gathered that already. I think in recent years, the traditional definition of a museum has been challenged. The museum as an institution that is looking backwards and that is preserving the past is now out of date. And to stay relevant for society, we need to think differently and adapt. In the CINE project, we believe that museums and heritage organizations can and should play a powerful role in creating the future. And our partners have already pointed at some of these things. We can create scenarios of how the future might look. We can imagine the future in different ways, but we can also provide visioning workshops or seminars for people, for audiences, for the communities we work with to create a shared idea of what a future might look like. I think that more than ever, museums will need good digital skills and people who have knowledge and experience with digital means. And this is not just to serve the people who might be online, but also the physical people who are coming into the museums post-COVID. These abilities will help museums to engage in new experiences and also maybe in this idea of participative stories. I think sharing might be the buzzword of the future in our sector. These are a few things we've been discussing in the CINE project, but we're also keen to know from others what they think. And today we have invited international speakers to join us with a wealth of experience to give us some new perspectives. And first of all, I would like to introduce Katrin Glinka with her talk, Imagining the Future, One Project at a Time. Katrin is a cultural scientist, museum professional and lecturer. And from 2017 to 2020, she has worked at the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz as a scientific project lead for Museum 4.0, a really inspiring project. And I heard her in a presentation in Germany where she talked about this, and I've been following it since. I'm really excited that Katrin is here today. It was a collaborative project that developed and evaluated innovative applications of digital technologies in museums. Katrin has since left the project, but is now working in a new position as the head of the Human-Centered Data Laboratory at the Institute of Computer Science at the Freie Universität Berlin. And I would now like to hand over to Katrin. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for the very kind introduction and for inviting me to be part of this inspiring event. And I'm very glad to hear the reflections of the partners, because I think that it will give me some opportunity to kind of pick up some of the aspects in my talk as well. I will start my screen sharing so that you can see a bit more structured follow my talk a bit more structured with my slides that I prepared for today. Anna, do you see the slides in full screen? Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
That's great. Yeah, as Anna already said, my talk is titled Imagining the Future, One Project at a Time. And that is kind of a tongue-in-cheek nod to our kind of permanent precarity, working 3 years in a project, collaborating with interesting partners, learning new things, and then going our separate ways again. And so from my perspective, having worked in several projects one after the other, I had to kind of stop at a time and kind of think about like how do we actually achieve our goals, that we can actually change the future of how we work in institutions, but also the goals that we achieve if we just, have 3 years, and then what happens after that. So I would like to take my time today to kind of focus on the question how we can make sure that digital innovation in the culture sector that, as I said, is oftentimes pushed forward in short-term projects can still have a long-lasting effect. So the question here is, how can we productively imagine the future of cultural heritage institution when we're just taking on the challenge one project at the time, with sadly often no long-term strategy or funding to support this cause. But let me start first by pointing out some of the negative effects of short-term funding that I've experienced, and I'm sure that you could contribute to that as well. So, as I said, digital innovations are often developed in such projects, and that also means that cultural institutions are only able to assign temporary contracts to people working in these projects. So this inevitably leads to the loss of knowledge and expertise when these people then leave the institution after finishing their work on the project. So this precarity in hiring practices is a huge problem when we try to achieve sustainable results and long-lasting impact and effect. And under these circumstances, I think it's especially hard to actually achieve long-term and structural changes in the institutions themselves. Also in regards to changing and improving infrastructures or updating them, because oftentimes investing in infrastructure is not covered by project funding, but also we try out new ways of working and collaborating. We try to work in agile and iterative ways, which oftentimes clash with the traditional way of working in institutions. So how can we actually make an impact and change the way we work in museums and in cultural heritage institutions when these circumstances exist? And the last aspect that I want to point out here is that projects might make it hard to have an actual impact on the institutions as such. From my experience, it can happen that temporary staff working on projects are considered kind of outsiders, or kind of, you know, are more like satellites that are connected to the institution but are not really at the core of the institution. And so they can join the institution to complete a specific project, and it's easier to dismiss their input or results as kind of coming from the outside, also in a disciplinary way of thinking. And so in comparison to the input or results that come from a person or a department that has existed for a long time in this structure, and that is already familiar with the inner workings of an institution, I've made the experience that, for example, digital innovations are kind of, you know, pushed to the outside again after the project has finished. And I'm sure that you might be able to add to that list, but what I want to focus on are not just, you know, listing the negative effects, but rather to think about how can we mitigate these negative effects and maybe change how we approach projects in the future. So the solution here, of course, should not and cannot be we all shouldn't apply for project funding anymore. This is not the point that I want to make, because projects are important and can be, and I've experienced it in the same way, can be a Kickstarter for innovation and change in the culture sector, and also have a huge potential for learning, for improving expertise, and for also creating networks like you just proven. But I think that we should reflect on the bigger picture and keep some of the negative aspects in mind when we approach a project. So before pointing out some of my ideas for how we can deal with this situation, I just want to give you briefly a better picture of what I think about when I think of digital technologies and innovation in the culture field. And I will just wrap that up very briefly, because you've just given the overview yourself with the projects or the reflections that you've shared. So we see digital technologies that are used to conduct research in the institutions themselves. So you have, for example, databases that are being used to store the information on the objects that you hold in your collections. You can use analysis, for example, using machine learning or computer vision to analyze objects, or use other non-invasive technologies to learn more or to conduct research on your objects. And then there's the second side of that, which is digital innovation projects that are focused on creating new and inspiring ways of interacting with the digital, with the cultural heritage itself. So that could be visualization interfaces that give a more exploratory overview of the collection and items. It can be games, as you've just pointed out, and it can also be extended reality applications that offer new ways of engaging with cultural heritage in a specific setting. So all of these areas are areas that need to be expanded in the upcoming years. And I think that we've seen a lot of progress already in these fields and a lot of inspiring and very innovative approaches. And I think that there's much more to come. So please, we should all keep on applying for funding to work on creating this digital future on both ends of the spectrum in the future. And then I try to kind of structure this field of this practice a bit more, because there are different ways to approach the creation of digital applications. You could understand them as a commodity or service where a cultural heritage institution approaches a digital expert on the outside, for example, a digital agency, and, for example, hires them to implement a standard solution or a best practice example for their own needs. which is perfectly fine. And we've also done so in the aforementioned project Museum 4.0. But a first hint that I want to kind of mention here is I've seen it happen that museums then would just hand that task over to the digital contractor or the digital agency and then just say, okay, return with the result when you're ready. And so this is something that I think is very well, dangerous to do, because then you have like the separation of the cultural heritage institution and the content providers and also curators, education experts that kind of shy away from collaborating directly with the digital production. And I think, Neil, you already mentioned that collaboration and co-creation is a very important factor in this field. Then there are more experimental or creative approaches where you might build on existing technologies, but apply them to a completely new field or context. There we have more collaboration usually, because it kind of needs this discourse to find out like where to go, how to apply the things, the technologies to the specific narration or content. And especially in that area, the inclusion of the institution's perspective is even more relevant than just, you know, using a standard solution. And then the last case, I kind of see in the last case, I kind of try to sum up the area where cultural institutions actually conduct transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary research together with a non-cultural heritage discipline. So that could be, for example, engaging with basic questions or where a solution is unknown, but that can be derived by building upon existing methods in a specific field and related research. So in this case, I see most ownership on the side of the institution, but even here we should make sure that the project is conducted on an eye-to-eye level and that the cultural heritage institution does not consider, you know, the research being conducted on the digital part of the team, but also that they kind of have to engage with that area. So what are the 3 suggestions or propositions that I want to discuss with you today that I see as a first step towards, you know, limiting the negative effects? So no matter what the setting or scope of the project is, as I just, you know, try to structure it in 3 areas of how you could collaborate, no matter how you work on it, I think that these 3 aspects apply to the field as a whole. So the first thing that I think we should improve or should have in mind when starting a new project is that we should encourage or even enforce collaboration between temporary and permanent staff. So what I think is a very good idea is to combine teams or set up teams that are, you know, part project experts that you need, but also part permanent staff that will stay at the institution after the project is finished. So with that, I think that we can be better in the area of knowledge transfer and also in reflecting if the innovation that we're working on will suit the actual needs and long-term needs of the institution, and also if the institution will be able to actually maintain it in the long run. This is also important in regards to taking in the requirements. I think we should not only understand the stakeholder or understand the audience as our stakeholders. Of course, they are very important and we should approach it with a user-centered design approach. But of course, as a stakeholder, you also have to understand your colleagues that will stay at the institution in the long run. The second aspect that I want to look at is documentation and adaptation of processes. So what I already mentioned is we change how we work, right? So in a digital project, you oftentimes work iteratively, you work in agile teams or, you know, use other methods of collaboration, which are oftentimes not, you know, things that you know or how you work in a cultural heritage institution. So instead of just taking that as a given, we should also communicate about how we work and what processes we have tried out, what the pros and cons of these processes were, so that other colleagues of ours can kind of, you know, evaluate if that might be a nice addition or a valuable addition to how they work in their daily, tasks. And then also documentation. I think for everyone working in digital technologies, this is a given fact. You always have to document what you do. So no source code can be, adapted if you don't have a good documentation. But what often is left out is the documentation of the kind of conception process. So what were the stages that you as a cultural heritage expert went through when conceiving that project? What were the decision-making processes? Why did you decide to do it that way and not the other? So these insights are really relevant and helpful for the museum or cultural institution itself, but also for others in the field. And when working on a project, just taking a very strong documentation approach prevents knowledge from being lost, especially in non-permanent digital projects. So you've all seen digital applications that were not maintained in the long run, and I don't think that we want to see those happening ever again in the future. So the third and last aspect that I want to point out here is plan ahead. That kind of sounds a bit silly and obvious, but I've had many discussions with institutions and partners that kind of argued, well, yeah, but now the project is ending and we don't have any money to keep the server running. Well, you knew for 3 years that the project is going to end at some time. So you had 3 years to talk to your funders or to, plan for a different distribution of financial resources to be prepared for that moment, which will arrive at a very, set time, because the end of the project, that is clear already. So that is something that I think is sometimes pushed to the side a bit too much. And also in regards to personal, planning the, how do you say that, the staff that you need in the long term. I've seen it happen that institutions that were working in digital projects then had a new post because someone was leaving, and they decided to just keep the job description exactly the same as it has always been. And in that way, we cannot work towards innovation and change. And if you have a position opening, I think that you should reflect upon what do you need in the long term. And maybe a education post could be devised in a way that also asks for that person to have some digital knowledge, so that that person can, work on such topics in the long term. And these are just, 3 areas where I've had many discussions over the last few years with institutions, and I do see the problems and the challenges, but I think that we have to address them, and I think that we have to talk about them and find solutions for them, because otherwise the future that we imagine, which is very inspiring and very positive, will just fall under the table one project at a time. And in that way, we will never see long-term effects, and that would be a very sad future to look into. So I hope that you can contribute to these ideas, how we can make it differently and how we can do better in the future. And these were my ideas, but I'm really curious to learn more about your experiences as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrin. Thanks for sharing your learning. It's very obvious that you have a lot of experience, not just in projects, but also in seeing how the organizations behind the projects work. And I find your argument interesting, how you've drawn up from the obstacles of one project at a time to a very nice and simple structure of what we can maybe do better, and have some very specific action points of collaborating and documenting and planning ahead to really keep the knowledge within an organization. So thank you very much for sharing this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We can take questions, as I said, later on. In the meantime, I would like to introduce Andinesh Babu. He works as a system architect and network manager in the Gardens and Museum IT team at the University of Oxford. The gardens and museums consist of 4 museums and 2 gardens, if I have understood that correctly, with over 8.5 objects and specimens. So a huge amount of objects and specimens, which I guess I would translate into data in terms of Antonesh's interest. He calls himself a cloud evangelist and has introduced the first ever public cloud framework at Oxford University, for example. Antonesh is presently exploring how machine learning, AI, and big data analytics can be a natural fit within the heritage sector. And his talk is entitled Machine Learning in the Heritage Sector. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Just for a matter of clarification, we have four museums and botanic gardens and Harcourt Arboretum. And across GLAM, we've got 8.5 million objects. I'll come to that. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just share my screen first. Screen on that.
Yeah, that works fine.
Thank you. So, so as Anna mentioned, I'm a systems architect and network manager in the Gardens and Museums IT team. We cover, as part of 7 members of the team, we cover the Ashmolean Museum, the Museum of Natural History, the Petrus Museum, History of Science, and the Botanic Gardens and the Harcourt Arboretum. So as part of this project, I'd like to mention and introduce my 2 primary stakeholders. So Nicholas Metallo, senior data scientist and an expert in data science, not only data science and people as well, translating the requirements into technical solutions and explaining technical solutions as if they're really simple, but of course they're not. And Jerome is a fantastic e-curator at the Herbert Coin Room, and he's responsible for the collections that I'll come to in a moment. So I find that it's always essential to speak a bit about the background of the university because it's of the federated nature. I often call it the United Nations of Oxford rather than the University of Oxford because of the federated nature of the university. We of course have been the #1 universities in the Times Educational Facts and Figures, which is since 2017 and going into 2021. There are over 24,000 students, and that includes about 11,955 undergraduate and over 12,000 postgraduates. And that's the percentage of our international students. And I could go on and on. We've got a massive employee membership within Oxfordshire and partnerships. And of course, we do have huge collections of heritage assets within the university. The heritage side of the museums is called Gardens, Libraries and Museums, of which these are the constituent parts. The Bodleian Library is the largest library in the UK. It's the deposit library. As part of my role, I'm not involved directly in the Bodleian. So this is what our team looks after. And Gardens, Libraries, Museums stands for GLAM. So as part of the strategic plan, which is basically, of course, I don't want to sort of rattle off the plan itself. So if I just focus on the 2 points, the past and the present and the innovation, these are quite relevant to the CINE talks, and which is where we come to. The example that I'll be quoting is from the Ashmolean Museum. So the Ashmolean Museum was founded in 1683. We are the oldest in the UK and possibly in the world, but no one's challenged us on that. So I think I'll stick to that. And of world famous collections ranges from mummies to contemporary art, and essentially the theme is telling stories through cultures and across time. And as going back to the CINE themes, while sort of preparing for presentations, I think preserver the past and instigator of new ideas future can only come from working in the present and trying to build a solid foundation, because as we speak, history's never stopped creating. So you still have objects coming in, there's a production pipeline happening. So these things need to be done. And that is where machine learning led to. As part of GLAM, I've introduced public cloud in the Oxford University, and we have done that since 2017. I've been aware of machine learning, and the potential of machine learning. Not AI, AI is another level. So basically fundamental parts of machine learning is something that we could use. So it's almost an answer searching for a question. So it's a traditional concept of technology in search of purpose, but in a good way. In 2018, 2017, that's when I thought, okay, let's have a hypothesis. Can a machine learning model or a system detect heads or tails of a coin? And then that extended to, hey, can we do a similarity search between coins? And we have got objects. We've got huge range of objects. As Anna mentioned, 8.5 million objects to be precise. And these are across all our museums, and we've got botanic gardens as well. But for consistency, I was looking at the best curated collection and the most well presented of them all, which led me to the coins collection in the Ashmolean Museum. Within the coins collection, the Roman Provincial Coin Collection, this is a fantastic website. It's an in-house solution built by Jerome. And this is the first ever systematic treatment of civic coinage at the height of Roman Empire. And it's brilliant because it's sourced from worldwide experts, and there's an open source solution. It's got a built-in API, and it just works. It's got about 300,000 objects. So these are quick facts about RPC Online. These may have been outdated because this is from 2 months ago, and it's hugely popular, as you may imagine. So the coins collection was the starting point for the machine learning prototype. What tools did I use? Entirely Amazon. So we worked with Amazon funding and Amazon research and the coins collection, which Jerome has built up. So we've got about 300,000 images, coins images published online. And these are the tool sets we used, the tool sets which are along the top. So basically these tool sets are off-the-shelf tools within, off-the-shelf tools, within Amazon, and the bottom bit is mostly specific to the cloud, to machine learning itself. The workflow itself, the workflow on a production run, you would have coin as an input. Once this is all coming past the training model, there's a pre-processing stage which involves bringing up just tweaking the models a bit, tweaking the input a bit. There's a feature prediction that the training model works on, which identify types of core, metal, region, province, and a lot more details there. And then you go into similarity search. It's like, I have this coin, can you find me similar ones? So this is a screenshot of the actual prototype. So we could select these as tags. So the machine learning algorithms we used is binary classifier, which is basically looking at upwards and reverse, heads or tails. And then we looked at image enhancement, where you could look at an object, separate the object from the background. So for example, someone's taken a photograph of the coin in their fingers. You could take the finger away, take the background away, and just have the coin. Image preprocessing toolkit was basically enhancing the coin and making it ready for the processing further. Auto rotation. Now that is a huge benefit for us, because when we take photographs of the coin, when they're digitized within the coin's study room, they may not be perfect in terms of 90 degrees. This bit alone is expected to save about 2.5 years of work as per rough estimates, because you always end up aligning the coins a bit. Maybe there's 30 degrees off, and that's how, that worked perfectly in terms of the mechanism we've used. The coin prediction information is basically a similarity search. So it's hypothetically saying, I've got this coin, can you find similar ones, or can you find exact ones? So that's what it does. And it's got a hidden neural layer, which brings up, again, all of these are off-the-shelf tools within Amazon. And then you do have similarity searches, which is again structured into multiple different algorithms, which is all available online. All of this is great. So where does this add benefit to the business? This is a traditional approach which Jerome has mentioned in terms of the coin collection and their benefits. We would fit in here. So the metadata angle is where we enhance it, make the process easier and better. And that sort of enables a faster iterational cycle, and that adds value within the collection. So we've done the prototype. This prototype was completed in July of last year. So with Amazon, it took about 40 days to get this up and running. Moving forward, as Catherine was saying, it resonates very well with us. So innovations are good, but sustainability, not so good, not so much. So how do we deal with sustaining the innovation pipeline, sustaining the skill sets that we've developed here? One of the options we are looking at is having a virtual ID service. Pre-COVID, we, as most museums, have an object identification service where you could go on Wednesdays and Tuesdays, meet the curators, and help identify your object. So I would see there might be an option for a virtual identification where you could take a photograph on your phone and or upload an image online. And this is an opportunity for machine learning to step in. Anomaly detection. So in the past, we've had issues with objects, our images being corrupted. The corruption is so subtle that it's annoyingly difficult to detect with usual tooling. So you could open an image and perhaps a few pixels are off or a stripe is gone through the image. So that's difficult to detect using conventional tools. And this is where machine learning could help. Auto-curation is another proposal that I'm looking at. So essentially, you ingest standard images, and there's a watcher in a bucket, and it's triggered, it builds, it runs the images through its machine learning model, and then it either builds a database of what it's learned and then actually sends the image back into a new bucket with metadata. So this is a very basic model, which could help with a lot of manual work, repetitive manual work, and probably look at a good percentage of collections being identified, whether you could say, hey, that looks like an image, that of a gallery, that looks like an image. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And just to allay the fears, we did check. I think it was on the MCG email on the mailing list yesterday. So yeah, there's the opportunities are vast. I think how we go from here in terms of using off-the-shelf technology, skill sets, and partners are going to be essential moving forward. And that makes me the end of my presentation. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dinesh. I'm glad that the curators will not be replaced by machines, but thank you for your insight into a systematic view of a collection. And how you apply off-the-shelf tools to actually get better data and get it faster. I would actually quite like to ask a question about that. We're coming to our panel discussion, and I was really inspired by this idea of the auto-curation adding metadata to objects. You know, in the museums, we have a lot of collections, and that's a lot of work to digitize all of them and add metadata. So you've used coins, but what other types of collection objects could be used? And how can that process be made more automatic? I'm specifically thinking about your future vision for that.
Cool. I'm very happy to pick up the question. Just for clarification, the coins was completely curated and built by Jerome. So the auto curation is a proposal that I'm working on. Again, it uses standard Amazon tooling. I keep saying Amazon because that's most accessible and it's public and it's open source. So the auto curation would also work on models that you have to train and build. So I would say, I'm guesstimating here, so probably 50 to 60% of classification saying you've got 100,000 images, and you could do a primary run of classification saying these are images from 1960s, 1880s. So you could do a primary filter based on auto curation. And I'm not saying it's going to be 100% there, but you could take a lot of workload. And even things like, for example, we're going through a massive store migration. So a lot of our stores and objects and stores are being moved. And some of them are not cataloged. The only thing we have is a photograph of an object and a accession number next to it. So you have to look at the image, type it manually into a database. So we can run auto-curation on that. So it's nothing fancy, it's just image recognition, a bit of OCR, and that would work as well. So I think it's a lot of manual work that we can eliminate, so we can focus higher up on where we can add value.
Thank you very much.
I can just add very quickly to that. I think the selection of the coins is a very specific task because they're very standardized in itself. They're very standardized in material and shape and imagery. You have text sometimes included. The challenge is a bit more hard when you have, for example, paintings, which, as you know, are very diverse in style. And most available computer vision algorithms are trained on real world images. So photos that are taken from huge image databases on the net, for example. So there's been a lot of research in the area of digital artistry where you actually train models on different stylistic expressions in paintings, for example, because if you use a model that is trained on cats and chairs and cars and people from, you know, photos, digital photos, you will have a very low recognition of objects in actual paintings, for example. But the field is moving towards specialized computer vision algorithms, and I totally agree that it's sometimes a very useful step to take something off the board, of the shelf, like Amazon services. But if we move further into specialized areas of research, I think that we have to collaborate even more on the technical and conceptual side of developing computer vision algorithms or other algorithmic approaches for automated metadata extraction or categorization of collections. So very important field of research, and thank you for sharing your approach, which also shows how much time and work can be saved by combining these methods in the workflow. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Are there any other comments on that topic, machine learning? Well, maybe in that case, we can broaden out this to ask a little bit about the future. I would like to know from the panel what sort of future trends you see in the sector. And if you have either specific examples, or maybe you can draw a picture of what things might be like in 10 years' time. Any volunteers?
I can go if that's okay. I think from my perspective, the future, well, it's almost now, it is now in a sense, it's going to be a lot of machine-to-machine interactions. Right now, our primary audience are people and searching traditionally. So that would extend into things like natural language processing and a lot of automation there in building that metadata. But I would also think the machine-to-machine interaction using APIs would be fundamental to how we collaborate. So example, Smithsonian has published their data sets. So we would see more and more museums sharing data and search engines coming up that use shared data. So I would say that's where we would go. And that's fundamentally where we would need to go in enhancing our collections.
Yeah, I can also add to that. I think that if you also mentioned sharing and openness is one fundamental aspect of how culture institutions are changing or have changed in the past few years. And what I've seen, or what I oftentimes see this, that there's an openness towards openness and sharing, but that the data quality oftentimes is not in such a state that it is already machine readable. So from open data, we have to make a step towards actually accessible data. And then also what I like to discuss and think about is actionable data. And by that, I mean data that is presented and shared in such a way that allows either machines to directly take action on the data, but also humans that can actually take the next step and, for example, conduct a data analysis on the data within a specialized interface in the same situation or in the same step. And in regards to digital technologies in the actual cultural heritage institution, although we know that we are all in lockup right now, but I hope that this will change quite soon again. I think that there is a lot of potential in the areas that some of you have worked on in augmented reality, virtual reality, but also in mixed reality, which is a use case that we also worked on in Museum 4.0 in collaboration with the research lab that I'm working at right now. And that was focused on using the HoloLens, a mixed reality technology, to develop a object-centered mediation approach. So I think you all have heard the criticism that digital technologies take up our, so much space in our lives. And when we go to museums, we don't want to look at a screen, but we want to look at the original object and, focus on the material presence of the object. And I don't think that that excludes each other. So the approach that we took was to use the HoloLens technology to develop a mediation application or interpretation application where the users or the visitors would look at the statue. In that case, it was a statue, which was, at the focus of our use case, look at the statue, and the system would very subtly just hint towards areas where the visitor could retrieve more information. And so these are technologies that have not been tested in the museum field that much yet, or when they were tested, they put mostly focus on the virtual content and not on the actual objects. So I'm really curious to see how these technologies will arrive in the museum, maybe in 10 years time or 5 years time. That might be another solution for mediation in museums in addition, or apart from using audio guides or multimedia guides, for example, that are screen based. So I'm looking forward to that future.
I think that's such an interesting point, Katrin, because I would have a slight feeling that there has been a trend over the last few years for the actual interpretation on site to be slightly sort of streamlined and slimmed down as people have become aware that visitors don't necessarily want to be overwhelmed by page after page of text when they're going around. But it's so exciting the way digital technologies provide a potential for people who are interested to, when they see the objects, to take another step forward and start on a sort of research journey, rather than the interpretation panel being the beginning and the end of the story to do with the object. I think it's so exciting. And for me, with a background in history, I feel this is such a potential and really hope to see it going forwards.
Yeah, I hope that we can share some of our results soon. We developed a prototype that has proven to work quite well already. But what was kind of cut off was the actual user study, because we wanted to conduct it in March, and then 2 days before we had our first test day, the museum had to close. But as you said, people are sometimes really bored, by just reading panels, and also text is a very intense, you have to kind of read it, you have to understand it, you have to process it, you have to match it to what you see. So there's a lot of bridges that you have to kind of cross in order to understand the meaning of an object. And what we did, for example, the object that we put at the center of our application was a sculpture of Victoria, the goddess of victory, that was damaged during the Second World War. And so she had one arm missing. And by, using the HoloLens technology, when the gaze of the visitor got close to the rest, the kind of missing arm area, it would signalize that if you look there more closely, the arm will show, or when they look more closely, we could augment the missing arm, so that the very important attribute of the laurel wreath was then again being shown. So, this is how you can also communicate content without text all the time. And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done on that area, but it's very exciting, and I hope that we will be able to share some more of that research soon when we have conducted the user study post-COVID.
Yeah, Alan?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, for me, one of the things that is you know, when thinking about the future is kind of interesting within the context of digital kind of in its role with heritage. I think that the digital domain is always changing, and it's always changing for some people call it a law, Moore's law, and the ability of computers to do more things over time. But I think what's interesting about this is that it can have the potential to be, you know, technology can have the potential to be disruptive, because it means that you know new potentials arise, and so you have to do things in new ways. And for me, I think that, you know, a big question is you know, disruptive doesn't always mean good. Disruptive can mean good, or it can mean bad. It can mean kind of like progress. And in that context, I think it's really interesting to think about the relationship between heritage and ownership and control and participation. And it does seem to me that the way in which the digital is going is that it has the potential to feed into notions of decolonializations and notions of democratization. It has the potential, you know, as we've seen with publishing, you know, and let's not, I don't want to make it look great, but, you know, with social media, the number of people who can publish, who can say something, has massively expanded, both in the context of the internet and in terms of society as well. And I think the way over the next 10 years that plays itself out, you know, the extent to which there's a breakdown between, you know, a sort of centralized distribution of the truth and a sort of a breakdown of the notion of audience and participant and participatory museum and all of those sort of things. To me, they're the kind of like fundamental questions about heritage and technology. To what extent are they actually going to empower people and change the way in which people relate to each other and people relate to heritage? And I think that is an unwritten book. It could go in positive directions or it could go in negative directions. And I think that's why it's important for us to be aware of those sorts of issues, so that we can, personally, I think, try to push things in the direction of participation and community control.
Thank you, Alan. I would quite like to ask maybe Scully about gamification and the idea of playfulness and narratives within heritage as a sort of future vision. But before I do that, I would like to take a question from our audience. It comes from Ole Martin Hammer, and he's asking that we talk about gamification to get the younger generation. But he would like to know, do the younger manage to understand what is real and what is fantasy? You're muted.
Yes, thank you, Anna. And yeah, it's first of all, I want to say that I share the opinion that Alan was expressing on this whole matter, and I think these discussions are quite interesting. Yeah, the question from Ole Martin. There's always this question of authenticity when we come to when we are actually interpreting or communicating the cultural heritage. So it's just the same with gamifying the cultural heritage as when we are making an exhibition. It's in the hand of the curator or the game designer so we have some principles to go with, like this Sevilla principles in digital heritage, and so if we are talking about that, I know there has been an ongoing discussion, not only in our project but also just all around when we are gamifying the cultural heritage and these things, when we are taking more of the history into some serious or some games like the Assassin's Creed and things like that. But I think the more the museum sector and the cultural heritage sector allows the game designers and collaborate with them, and the better result you get, the more authenticity and the more true value you have within the games. Coming to the playfulness and all that, I mean, it's a part of the same things in a way. I see the future very wide opening in all this, and the playfulness is, and the cultural heritage. It's so important for us who are working in the cultural sector to trigger the young generations and trigger our audience to of course learn about the past, but not least think creatively. So I want to have a creativity out of it as well, and with more open access to assets and artifacts and data, the more you can well, if you are participating or if you are using things, you learn more about it. So that is essential from my point of view, that to give the people, to give people the power of curating a bit.
Well, we actually developed a game also as part of Museum 4.0, and there we mixed actual cultural heritage material, digitized material, with new game avatars and digital objects. And if you want, I can just share a 1-minute clip of that to kind of give you an impression of how that looked in the end. Do you see it? Mm-hmm. So here we kind of just have the introduction where the players can choose the robot that they want to use to repair the damaged old movable books or other paper engineered objects. And then you enter the game field, which is more like a labyrinth, and you have the fog of war. So you have to explore it and find the old books that are damaged and understand how they kind of, were moved and what part is missing. And then they have to walk through the labyrinth again and find the missing part, go back to the book, repair it, and then they can chase away the paper eaters. So that's kind of basically just the very short story of that book. So here you see how they repair it. And one question also that we had, or one fear that we had, was that the kids wouldn't understand that that was, historical books and old material, and that they just would conceive it as a digital game. And that was not the case. They're very smart. So we conducted several user testings with them, and they directly understood that this was a combination of old and new. And I can just stop the sharing here because it's also just a short clip. And so what I learned from that very, very small, prototype was that we shouldn't underestimate kids and young people. They're very, very savvy in regards to that. Also in regards to aesthetics, in regards to game aesthetics, in regards to digital aesthetics. And so when we talked to them in the end, they were like, yeah, I think I've seen such books before, but I didn't know that they were so old, and I didn't really know how the movement worked. So yeah, so we kind of, understood that they had learned something from it. And they also said, but you made a game out of that. I understand that. And now you wanted it to look modern, right? So it was really, really fun conversations with the kids. So I think that also shows the value of actually talking to your target audience to better understand how much you have to explain in words and text again, or how much they can actually derive, how much meaning and understanding they can derive from a thoughtful design and from experiencing and interacting with the digital application, in that case, a small, very low level browser game prototype. So, but a very important question, actually, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe this leads us on to asking if digital tools can help us address the challenging topics of our time in the future. So I'm thinking specifically about climate change, dominating narratives, or displacement. I guess it comes under the curatorial, if you like. Marinos?
Thank you. That's a very important topic which came in now. All this what we do in digital cultural heritage and climate change, you know. In the Greek ancient time, that was a very famous worldwide philosopher, Plato. He was also an academician, and he wrote 13 books. The last one, dedicated Timotheus, or it is well known as Timotheus, that was a dialogue. He's describing a dialogue of an old Egyptian priest who visited Athens, the old state Athens, city and state Athens. And the dialogue was with that person and a Greek gentleman there. And the priest started criticizing the Greeks because they don't give a particular attention to preserve their unique knowledge and achievements. And the Greek guy said, asked the priest, well, okay, that's how we are. But can you please be more in details, go further in detail? And he said, look, this is what is happening every day here in this world, and especially here in Greece. Yeah, it's raining. You see what is happening. There is a fire. You see what is happening. There are all these human interventions. You see what is happening. And all this because you don't take care, you don't preserve, you are not very careful to this what is happening, and you don't protect all these great achievements that you manage up to now, you Greeks. Everything is destroyed and nothing is preserved for the generations to come. The Greek guy asked him, can you be more concrete? And he gave him exact examples of the climate change. Please read the book Timotheus. I will send you the link. It's extremely important. That's exactly this what we do today so far as climate change concerned, so far as green policy concerned, and climate change and cultural heritage protection. Exactly that. Now, the Greek guy continued in the dialogue and asked him, tell us, how do you do that in Egypt? And the priest said, very simple. This is what we want to preserve. We go in our temples, and you know what? We engrave them in the walls of our temples. And then the Greek gentleman asked him, wait, now who is protecting them then? Because you wrote them on the walls, then it's everything okay? He said, pay attention, we have the gods. And they protect them. And if something happening and someone goes there to destroy them, destroy the temples, you know what is happening? Then the gods are behind them. So they take care for the preservation. But this God, it is now available in Egypt. It's evident and it's clear. It's over 5 or even beyond that, 5,000 and so on years, well-preserved stories, which you can find in the temples, but in whatever other places you are going to visit. And a temple for the ancient Egypt was even the grave, and it's there where we find, or now we do this reverse engineering to find out what it was there, and we discover all these kind of things that it comes every day out. So, and if I say one word about the future, Anne, this is what you ask about, let's say, imagine the future. One very important area in digital cultural heritage in the future for us is the digital preservation. We are producing every day so many big data. I'm taking now the wording from my previous colleague from the University of Oxford. Who takes care? Nobody takes care. Who is preserving that? The Internet Archive. I talked earlier about the ancient Egyptians, you know, the pharaohs. Where do you find now the pharaohs? You don't go to make excavations to find them. But then you have the Greeks. Where are the Greeks? The Hellenistic time period. Where are the Romans? Where are, you know, all those great civilizations? Where are they? Who took care to preserve all this knowledge? And not only to see the past, you say in the title of your project, it means what? Learn from the past to improve the future. And that's all about knowledge. And if we talk about knowledge, now I'm coming to Catherine and to museums. Museums are defined as what? Places of knowledge. If I see an artifact, I want to see the knowledge, unique knowledge. There is a reason why this artifact has been created. And if there is a building which got the name monument, not a building, monument, there is a memory there. And that's this big data that we talked earlier. Big, very complex, multimodal, multimedia data, the memory, huh? Thousands of years old. Go back to pharaohs. How many thousands of years? If these buildings or if these objects start talking, because we say one photo is equal to how many words? 1,000 words. It's a story, yeah? Imagine now an artifact, or imagine a monument, a 3D object. What it is there, hidden behind. You mentioned paintings. Very nice one example. I can tell you my personal experience. Sorry for the delay. I went to the National Gallery in London. When I entered, I saw people standing in front of the different nice, beautiful paintings. And I said, because I wanted to see the paintings and it was not possible. And when I pushed one or two, oh, I got a face, you know, was well, pay attention, gentlemen. I disturbed them. Then I took my way and I moved to the other end, and then I came back. When I came back, I saw them standing again there without moving at all. And I said to myself, there is a problem with these people. They are, you know, but actually the problem was with me, because I didn't understand what the people did there actually. I didn't get the message. They tried to communicate with these objects. They tried, let's say, to receive, and now I'm talking like a computer scientist or electrical engineer, to receive the appropriate frequency and the wavelength in which this painting sent out the story, the message of the painter, and of course why it is looked like that, and so on and so on. The story which is behind, and they wanted to learn something out of that, to get at least an interpretation, because the signal, it was, you know, not well received. There is no language, there is no channel of communication between all these objects and us. And that's the second greatest challenge in the ICT in the future, not only in the 10 years, but let's say in 30 years from now. And that's what is going to be, because of my previous colleague and because of Catherine from Oxford and from Berlin, the ICT, the power of the ICT, the revolution of the ICT in the beginning of the 21st century will manage, the day will come, to bring these objects to talk. And then you will see how the future will be changed, because there is a lesson to learn. And these young kids are not going to play with the robots, are going to learn really their real lesson. That's for me.
Can I pick up? Oh, sorry, Agnieszka.
So sorry, that's very interesting. I just want to mention 2 points on. It's really exciting in terms of a follow-on from my colleague. So 2 things. One is repatriation. We are looking at object repatriations back to the origin, and once the objects are repatriated, how do we have digital representations of them? That is going to be one of the challenges of the future. And another exciting thing that we had recently is, if I quickly share my screen, it's just the websites. There's a project at Petrus Museum called Plastic Fantastic, and all the whole experience was about 3D printing musical instruments so that they can be playable, because the condition of the musical instruments is such that you can't use them. So this project was looking at how they print an equivalent, a scanned version, and that's as close as authentic playing you get. That these are the exciting things that you could connect in future, and that ties into how we manage the collections being repatriated or just existing in some digital form.
Thanks, Katrin.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up the notion of being able to derive knowledge and understanding the one message that a painter wanted to contribute or communicate to me as the observer. I think that we have a unique possibility and option to also rethink this notion of monolithic knowledge attached to museum objects in the future. I think a huge problem in regards, for example, to dealing with colonial objects in European and Western museums has been this notion of we, the experts, will be able to derive this one aspect or this one meaning and set of knowledge about this object, and that is what you will be communicated and what we offer as interpretation. And we know from many, many years of post-colonial theories and institutional critique that is a very hegemonial approach to understanding the meaning of cultural heritage and how it is communicated to the public and other experts. So what I hope, and I wouldn't say that digital technologies should be seen as the remedy here, but I think that we will see much more development in the area of a diversified knowledge base. So accepting the fact that if you have one object, it can have a multitude of meanings for a very, very, diverse and broad public. And that is totally fine. It is totally fine if I approach a painting, look at it for 5 seconds, and either I, feel something emotionally, or I recognize something, or it reminds me of a friend or whatever, that is fine. And even more so, if we talk about disputed objects from colonial backgrounds, I think, Agnieszka, you made a very important point. We will see more retribution of objects, and we will also deal with the fact, or we will have to deal with the fact that some cultures will not accept us to still look at the objects even in their digital surrogate form. So, we've come so close to being, open and sharing everything that we digitize and just bring it out there, which I support, which I'm, very enthusiastic about. But now also rethinking how we deal with cultural heritage, not only in physical spaces of the museum storage, but also if it is maybe for some cultures and for some objects, very, very even, damaging in their point of view, or very violent, to just put them out there on the web as a 3D reproduction or screen, you know, as a photo and so on. So I think that these discourses have to diversify much, much more in the future. And also, Anna, you just hinted very quickly at the future challenges that we all face as a society, as a global society, such as climate change and so on. I think that we shouldn't regard digital technologies as a remedy for any of the challenges that we're facing, but rather understand where they can be of benefit. For example, for us, communicating about these issues on a level where we all sit in our, you know, different homes and talk about these things much more than we would have done before this pandemic hit us. So don't regard, I wouldn't suggest to kind of, you know, put the pressure on digital technologies to save us from all the problems that we're facing, but rather kind of rethink and understand how they also play into existing structures of power and existing structures of oppression, and try to find a new mindset and a new model, maybe, how to deal and understand those inner workings of knowledge production, of power relations, of impact, long-term impact. And of course, my colleagues mentioned that, how to preserve that multitude of knowledge for future generations. So yeah, that's kind of my point on knowledge and the monolithic approach of knowledge that some museums still have, which I believe will change, or is already changing and has changed already.
Thank you very much. It's a little bit painful to have to stop this very interesting discussion now, because I think we're right in the midst of very interesting thoughts. I had wanted to give the word to Marinos again for some final reflections. I'm very aware that both he needs to leave soon, and that we are at the end of the time that we had allocated for this event. However, if Marinos would like to speak for another few minutes, I would like to give him the word. Is that the case?
Yes, I have a small presentation. I developed that after I followed a couple of your events, but also the discussions now with the two previous colleagues. I managed to change, and if you allow me, it will be nice. But I would like to start first by saying thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very thankful to Buna, who established this bridge of, let's say, communication first, and then now with this what we have to tonight. And then to congratulate you, because I had a look on all this what you did, and there is a big overlapping with this what we do, and I was not aware that on the other side of the Europe, people or consortia like you existing, doing more or less similar things with this what we do here in Cyprus and in other networks. Please allow me just only to show to you my presentation here. Yes. So, let's move to the next one. Our name, you see here, Mnemosini. 500 years ago, that was a lady. I was actually an ancient Greek goddess and the mother of muses. Now we're coming to the museums again, yeah? And the 9 ladies were on that time, 1,000 years ago, responsible for what? To keep or to preserve the memory of the ancient Greeks. To preserve it in which way? You see here the different areas or sectors that they divided on that time, the ancient Greeks, their cultural heritage. You see here at the end, Urania, Urania had the name of the grandfather, yeah? It's a preservation, huh? And she was responsible for astronomy. On that time, astronomy, that was a very big, complex field. That was there where you had the mathematicians, the philosophers, specialists in physics, and all these genius people. So these ladies and the mother had a special temple where the ancient Greeks went to preserve their memories. And the place, you know that, or I'm sure about that, the name was museum. And that's the reason why we still keep this word, preserve this word, yeah? Museum. So, and the mother was Mnemosyne. So, okay. Now, if we go and see the knowledge, the memory, and the story, yeah, we see now the past. I have two examples here. A non-movable and a movable one. The one is a monument. Pay attention. It's not a building. It's a monument. And the second one, it's a museum object. So a non-movable and a movable one. So the monument, the example of the monument, in oops, there is a problem with my presentation. It looks like that the presentation doesn't work, but it doesn't matter. Okay, let's go to the object of from the museum. You see here, that's an object which is in the center of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. You see it, and I don't know what you understand out of that, but it's, yeah, it is one of the most important museums in archaeology, even. But it is there, you know? So that's a closer look. This is if you have a look from inside, using modern technologies, Marie Curie, X-rays, yeah? And this is what we will get at the end on the right-hand side. That's a complex machine. And this is actually the oldest analog computer of the world. And this object is one of the most complex objects ever discovered in the world. That's the so-called Antikythera mechanism. If we go now and set up the mathematical system of how this machine is working, that's really crazy. That's a kind of knowledge was existing 2,500 years ago in Greece on this planet, and it was lost. And suddenly, 100 years ago, at the ground of the sea, coincidentally, fishers discovered this, what we see here on the left-hand side of the object. It's amazing. So if I visit a museum, I see this on the left-hand side. But this is what I want to get as a message when I leave this place, the place of knowledge, is this what it is on the right-hand side. So who is interested on our knowledge from the past, actually? Who? And look, that's the technology, yeah? That's the present. That's all these people. That was, of course, the monument which I wanted to show to you, but it didn't work with my presentation, and I apologize for that. If it's a monument, we need the architects, we need the archaeologists, we need the civil engineers, we need the chemical engineers, we need even the historians, a monument, the religious one, even the theologists, and all this kind of thing. And then we have, of course, the experts, the non-experts, and all these kind of things, yeah. So the needs of the users or of those who are going to use the knowledge. So whatever we digitize, whatever we model, whatever we preserve, it has to be processed in such a way so that we do what? Prepare it so that the monument is available for an architect, is available for a surveyor, is available for a civil engineering, Imagine Parthenon, yeah, it's still there, huh? 2,500 years old building. And the engineering behind, it's amazing, yeah? That's why UNESCO is saying it's of an outstanding and universal value. And here is again, how do we define using computer science or the latest of ICT available in our hands at the beginning of the 21st century, the outstanding and universal value for everybody, for any kind of users, even the kids, yeah? So that they can learn something, not only about Parthenon hidden engineering, but also democracy, because Parthenon, it is the symbol of democracy, so that they, you know, learn the real democracy. And then, of course, our monuments, museums, and sites are talking, as I mentioned earlier. The issue is, do we understand them? No. Okay. And how can the digital era contribute to a better understanding, access, preservation, and protection of the history of mankind? And here it comes another one challenge for the future: standards. We are documenting the past. We see the past. We are trying to understand, interpret the past, but we don't have standards. Imagine, no grammatic rules, no semantic rules. To do what? To document correctly the knowledge, the story, the memory, and even to describe the identity. And that's all about, at the end of the day, identity and knowledge and memory, yeah? And thank you. It was amazing to be with you. And of course, I would like just only to say, from this what we heard today, but also from this what we experienced in the last few presentations, not only from today, but also from the previous events that you had. You did an amazing work. And it's from my side to say congratulations. And me, I'm not a historian, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a computer scientist, and you will not believe it, mechanical engineer. But I dedicated my career in the area of cultural heritage, the digital dimension of that, yeah? And if you are asking me if I see the past, how I want to imagine the future, on the time of the digital transformation in the area of cultural heritage, yeah, then I will say we need to take care that this, whatever we have at the moment, to be at least preserved in a digital form, to keep a copy of a digital form. You see what's happened in Palmyra, yeah, in Mosul recently. But I'm a Cypriot. This is what happened there. It happened in my country, 74, with the Turkish invasion here. Or in whatever place there is a war. See now in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, what is happening over there. It's exactly the same. In whatever place there is a war, first thing which is happening is eliminate the identity, destroy cultural heritage, so that there is no proof that this place belongs to this community, to this society, to those people. So destroying memory, it is the first duty in a war. Good that we have the blue shield, of course, but okay. Nevertheless, by ending, I will say, future challenge is the preservation of the digital records which we are producing now. Who is giving a guarantee that whatever you produce now in your project are going to be readable in 10 years or not? Because you took the limit of 10 years. Yeah? And of course, standardization, universal, worldwide standards on how we have to digitize, on how we have to post-process, pre-process, post-process, model the knowledge, as our colleague from Oxford mentioned, and of course, how to preserve and prepare it for the users, from the kids in the kindergarten up to the best, out of the best experts in the world. That's from my side. And this is what we do also at the UNESCO chair. Gunnar knows that that's also the biggest challenge that we have in the ERA chair, the chair from the European Union. And thank you very much once again, yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Marnos. It's been really nice that you have taken the last words in our series of CINE Talks. And I guess I would like to sort of summarize that there is a lot of work for us ahead, I feel. And I think that is a very positive thing. From one project at a time to a very big vision for what might come in the future. I hope that this talk and also the whole series of events have given people a lot of ideas for the future and an inspiration to act. Museums, I think, can do amazing things, and often they start with collaboration. So please don't hesitate to get in touch if you would like to talk about the future and have an idea to collaborate. I would like to thank our speakers today, Katrin, Andinesh and Marnos, and I would also like to thank our panel and the CINE project partners to very actively taking part in these CINE talks, and of course our Facebook audience for watching. We have had mixed live watching audiences, but also we had a lot of views after the talks. So they are still available as a whole program, and we will put them on our website too. And the whole series included storytelling and gamification, digital possibilities for data collection and presentation, what is successful co-production, reviewing curatorial practice, and today, future digital possibilities. So thank you all for watching, and we do hope that we will see you again. Both Museum Nord and I'm sure also our CINE partners will be hosting other events in the near future. So please come again and watch us again. Goodbye from us and from everyone who's here. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.